Ladies and gentlemen, there exists a certain kind of suffering that goes unnoticed, a pain endured not with screams, not with complaints, but with silence. And that silence, it is mistaken for strength. It is mistaken for resilience. But the truth is, it is often mistaken for permission. People will wrong you. Some will betray you. Others will neglect you. And some will simply watch as you struggle doing nothing. Because to them, your pain is invisible. They convince themselves that if you don't cry out, if you don't demand justice, then no harm has truly been done. But suffering does not disappear just because the world chooses to look away. No, it sinks deeper into the soul, carving scars that only time will reveal. And here's the great mistake, the assumption that silence absolves them of guilt. It doesn't. Because what they fail to see is that every wound inflicted upon another person carries a cost, and that cost must be paid. Some people believe they can escape consequences by refusing to acknowledge what they've done. They bury it, they rationalize it, they push it into the corners of their mind where they think it can never return. But the mind is not a vault, it is a mirror. And eventually that mirror will reflect back at them the truth they so desperately tried to ignore. Guilt is an unforgiving tormentor. It is patient. It waits in the shadows undisturbed until the moment is right. Then it strikes. And when it does not whisper. It screams. It comes in sleepless nights. It comes in relationships that never seem to work. It comes in the unshakable feeling that something is missing, that something is wrong. It arrives not as punishment, but as reality. The undeniable realization that they were not as good, as just, as innocent as they once believed. And so you, the one who carried pain in silence, do not need to seek revenge, do not need to cry out for justice. The universe has a way of balancing things. The weight you bore will shift, and when it does, they will feel it. Not as you did, but in a way they cannot escape. Because while you carried pain in silence, they will carry guilt in torment. And that is a burden far heavier than you ever bore. The weight of silent suffering. There is a particular kind of pain that exists outside the realm of recognition. It is not the pain that draws attention, not the kind that comes with loud cries or visible wounds. It is the kind of suffering that is endured quietly, tucked away beneath the surface, unseen by the world. And this kind of suffering carries with it an immense weight, one that the sufferer bears alone. People have a strange way of perceiving silence. They often mistake it for strength, as if the absence of complaint is proof of resilience. But more dangerously, silence is often mistaken for insignificance. If someone does not voice their pain, does not demand to be heard, then surely it must not be that bad. Surely it does not require attention. This illusion allows the world to look away, to move forward unaffected, leaving the one who suffers to shoulder their burden in isolation. But pain that is carried in silence does not disappear. It does not dissolve into the background simply because no one acknowledges it. Instead, it seeps inward, embedding itself into the psyche, shaping the way a person sees the world and themselves. It transforms into quiet resentment, into unseen scars that dictate decisions, trust, and even self-worth. And yet, those who ignore the suffering of others believe they are free from consequence. They tell themselves that if no one confronts them, if no one explicitly calls out their neglect or their wrongdoing, then they are absolved. But that is not how reality works. The truth is that the weight of suffering does not vanish, it only transfers. The pain that was once carried in silence will manifest in ways they cannot predict, and when it does, it will no longer be theirs to ignore. The moral debt accumulates like interest. Every action we take, every decision, every moment of neglect, every betrayal, creates a ripple effect. And while some may believe they can move through life without consequence, the reality is that nothing goes unnoticed by the deeper mechanisms of existence. When someone inflicts harm, whether through malice or indifference, they are taking something that does not belong to them. They are creating a moral debt, and like any debt, it does not simply vanish, it accumulates. At first, it may seem insignificant. Perhaps they dismiss it, justify it, or simply refuse to acknowledge it at all. But time is relentless, and the weight of unresolved actions compounds. The mind may try to suppress guilt, but suppression is not erasure. Instead, guilt embeds itself like a dormant seed, growing in the hidden corners of the subconscious, waiting for the right moment to emerge. No one escapes this reckoning. Some will feel it through the slow unraveling of their own peace, a quiet but persistent discomfort that gnaws at the edges of their mind. Others will see it reflected in their relationships, patterns of conflict, trust that withers, a deepening sense of dissatisfaction that follows them wherever they go. It may take years, even decades, but the debt will come due. The mistake people make is thinking that silence or inaction means they are free from responsibility. But responsibility is not something we can choose to avoid. It is something that follows us, whether we acknowledge it or not. The moral debt they accumulate does not forget, does not forgive, and in time it will demand payment. And when it does, they will realize that what they thought was a fleeting moment of wrongdoing was in fact a slow-building storm, one that they will have no choice but to face. The consequences of avoiding responsibility. There is a dangerous illusion that many people cling to, the belief that if they ignore something long enough, it will disappear. They assume that by avoiding responsibility, by refusing to acknowledge the pain they've caused, they are free from the burden of consequence. But avoidance is not an escape, it is a delay. And the longer responsibility is evaded, the heavier its consequences become. Human beings have an extraordinary ability to rationalize their actions. They tell themselves that what they did wasn't that bad, that time will smooth things over, that if no one holds them accountable, then they were never truly at fault. This is a fragile delusion. The weight of unresolved actions does not dissipate. It festers beneath the surface. The mind may suppress it for a while, but it is not erased. Instead, it returns, often in ways they least expect and at times they are least prepared for. Some will carry this burden as a persistent unease, a gnawing discomfort they can never quite define. Others will find that their avoidance manifests in their relationships, an inability to form deep connections, a cycle of mistrust and distance that seems to follow them no matter where they go. They will wonder why peace eludes them, why satisfaction slips through their fingers. And the answer will be simple. They never confronted what needed to be confronted. The truth is that responsibility is not a choice. It is a force that exists whether we acknowledge it or not. And those who refuse to take ownership of their actions will eventually come to understand this, not through a moment of enlightenment, but through the slow, inescapable realization that what they avoided has been chasing them all along. The truth always surfaces. No matter how carefully someone hides from reality, no matter how deeply they bury the past, the truth has a way of rising to the surface. It does not need permission. It does not ask for the right moment. It simply waits patiently, relentlessly, until it can no longer be ignored. People who cause harm, whether through neglect, betrayal, or deliberate cruelty, often believe they can outrun the consequences. They convince themselves that silence is the same as resolution, that if no one speaks of the past, then it no longer exists. But silence is not the same as healing. Pain that is unacknowledged does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes resentment, self-doubt, or an invisible wall between the person who suffered and the world around them. And one day, that wall will crack. The truth does not always emerge in grand, dramatic moments. Sometimes it reveals itself in the smallest details. A fleeting look, a conversation that suddenly turns cold, an unexplained unease in someone's presence. It lingers in the air, waiting for the right moment to strike, and when it does, it is undeniable. The person who believed they had escaped the past will find themselves staring directly into the face of what they once ignored. There is no running from reality. The things we suppress, the truths we refuse to confront, do not disappear. They wait, and when they finally rise, they do not come gently. They come with the force of every moment they were ignored, every wound left unhealed, every truth denied. And those who thought they were free will come to understand they were never free at all. Justice comes in unseen ways. Many believe that justice is something external, handed down by laws, enforced by others, or delivered through direct retribution. But real justice, the kind that cannot be bargained with or evaded, operates on a far deeper level. It is woven into the fabric of human existence, inescapable and precise. It does not always come in the way people expect, nor on a timeline they can predict. But it comes, and when it does, it is undeniable. For those who have inflicted harm and walked away without looking back, there is a dangerous assumption that because nothing immediate happened, nothing will happen. They may convince themselves that they have moved on, that time has erased their actions, that if no one seeks vengeance, then they are free. But justice is not always loud. It does not always arrive in the form of punishment. Sometimes it is far quieter and far more relentless. It seeps into the fabric of a person's life in ways they don't immediately recognize. It comes in the form of trust that never fully returns, in the restless feeling that something is missing, in relationships that crumble without clear reason. It lingers in their mind, an unspoken weight, reminding them in moments of solitude that they were not as righteous, as justified, as blameless as they once told themselves. Justice does not always require an external force. Often it is the mind itself that delivers it. The past does not dissolve simply because it is ignored. It echoes, grows, and eventually demands to be faced. And for those who thought they had escaped, there will come a day when they realize the truth. While others carried pain in silence, they have been carrying something far heavier: guilt, regret, and the inescapable shadow of the choices they made.